Good afternoon and welcome to the Training the Trainer podcast with Vince Stevenson. Today it's my pleasure to interview my friend and colleague, Mr. David Rigby. David, how are you doing, old chap? It seems like ages since we met just a few months ago in Benalmadena.
Well, I'm in Madrid and for once it's warm. So I've done 2 hours worth of Spanish conversation today and then had lunch out and had a siesta because it's Spain, and now I'm here.
Okay, well, it's great to see you. Okay, David, let's do you want to tell us a little bit about your business, what you're doing right now, but then we're going to hark back to your early days and we'll find out a little bit more about your background.
Okay, well, my name is David Rigby. I come from Manchester-ish, and I run a company called SmartCoaching&Training. And what we do is we do consulting and mentoring and coaching and presenting and training. And we have worked with associates. I've got 30 associates, and they're in 4 continents, and they speak between them 14 languages, and we have 5 religions, and the age range is about 50 years. So it's a very diverse group, but they're also a very similar group because I chose all of them.
Okay. Now, tell us a little bit about how this came around, because I'm pretty sure that you've done a lot of classroom work yourself, but you work more with associates these days. Is that correct?
Yes, I mean, my objective is to find work for my associates rather than me, but sometimes things turn up for me, so I go and do them.
Well, I was going to say that I've seen you working at a couple of conferences, and I would say you're one of the most dynamic people there. One of the most, what should we call you? A maverick, bit of a maverick, I think. So again, it's great to see you when you're on stage. You're full of surprises.
Thank you.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about your background. So you say you're from Manchester-ish. Now, where exactly is Manchester-ish? I think I know, but I don't think the listeners would know.
Wigan, which is between Manchester and Liverpool.
Okay,
that's where I was
Wigan.
born.
Okay, and you left home at 18. What's the story behind that?
Well, that's easy. I went to university. And I went to university in London because I wanted to escape. And so I did, and I escaped. And so I studied mathematics and logic in Bedford College, London, which was in those days in Regent's Park, so it's very central. I did my 3 years in London. And during that time, I carried on meeting people from different countries. Even at school, one of my best friends was the only Indian in the school. And I always remember this guy came for tea. And my grandmother lived with us, and she said, "He never ate any bread." I'm surprised, but there we are. That's my memory of him not eating bread. But certainly in university, I spent a lot of time with the Greeks. They're from Cyprus, so I learned a bit of Greek dancing, and I learned a bit about how to read the language. And I can tell you the Greek for tea is tea, and the Greek for coffee is coffee, but you have to read it to learn all this kind of stuff. And then I got a job, and that was also in London. And my first job was a trainee bank manager, which I hated. And I found I got into computing. My first proper job was in computing, writing programs. And so my career really started from there. And it went through various traditional roles, such as writing programs, programming team leader, systems analyst, systems team leader, and project management. And then eventually I went into consulting. And I've been sort of doing consulting ever since. And that was a series of jobs, including working for PricewaterhouseCoopers, as it is now. And that was in central London with the banking profession. So I learned a lot about banking in those days. And I also managed eventually to do my first spell of working abroad. I had learned Italian because I just liked the country. And the company I was working for then James Martin Associates, they had an office in Rome. So first of all, I went to a conference in Milan where I mistook the main station for the cathedral. It was a good experience, and did a year then in Italy. Still petrified about speaking Italian, but I understood it quite well, and I learnt how to deal with different nationalities, and I knew enough about the culture to enjoy it. But I always remember the first thing that one of my clients was a telephone company, and the person I was working with said, "Oh, it's only 20 years and 4 months and 3 days and 2 hours before I retire." Great. That's very encouraging.
Okay, I can tell you a similar story of my own upbringing. My first job was a civil servant, and as an 18-year-old, and there were people of my age already counting down the days to retirement, and I just thought, I've got to get out of here. I've got to get out of here before I get contaminated by that thought process that they're already thinking about their, 40 years on, 45 years on, they're dreaming about getting their pension and forgetting about actually living life.
Yeah, well, we're now at the point about both getting the pension and living life. I think you have to do both at the same time if you've got any sense.
Okay, so big question. How did you, what were your thoughts about moving career and suddenly sort of jumping into a training type role, or maybe an L&D role, I think?
Well, when I worked for several companies, I actually set up my own company in 1994, 1996, and I worked abroad quite a lot by that point. And my first bits of work were consulting, so these are quite long projects. And the problem with those is you're never at home. I was never at home because I was always in different countries, and you've no control over it. So I decided to shift away from consulting into training because there were shorter things to do, fundamentally. So that's how I got into training. I decided not to do consulting.
Was that a big leap? Was that a bit of a culture shock for you, or did you just?
Basically, if you're consulting and you're presenting to people anyway, and you're running training courses as part of what you're doing, then so it's not a big leap. It's just the big leap is being able to be organized enough to move around fairly flexibly and deal with very short timescales.
Okay. Now, you told me in your briefing document that you married an Irish Catholic. So did that have any impact on your ability to travel? What was the thoughts behind that?
Well, I think it particularly shows the rebel in me even then, because being a good English Protestant would be the ideal thing for my parents, would have been to marry a good English Protestant, but of course I wouldn't do that. And this would be in the middle of the Irish Troubles as well.
I see.
And so I did get over to Northern Ireland, and my wife's grandfather had me play the piano in a local bar. I used to play in a band of Cayley music, but I never knew anything from the titles because I always learned everything by ear. And as a consequence, I'm in this bar, and grandfather said, "Well, just play the piano then." And I'm playing all these tunes thinking, oh, they could be Catholic, they could be Protestant, they could be American, could be anything. And the point is, I'm still here, but the bar got blown up shortly afterwards.
Oh dear. Oh, well, that's well, glad you're safe for today's interview.
Well,
okay.
I've always loved Irish culture because it's more rebellious than the Brits. They've got better music, and the education is better, and particularly in the arts world. So it's good to know the Irish.
Indeed, it is. We had a bit of a shock about 10 years ago, and that is that my daughter, when she was about 14, she said, could she have her DNA done? So we had her DNA done, And it turns out I'm 23% Irish, which is a very high percentage, but there's nobody overtly Irish in my family. And but I'm from Manchester, and during the Industrial Revolution, lots of people came over to for the factories and the railways and the canals, and so I mean I guess that's where that influence came from. But I repeat, there's absolutely nobody in my family who's overtly Irish, and so we kind of lost that a long time ago, unfortunately. Would have been nice. Yeah. Did you see the rugby yesterday? Ireland really smashed England. I'm sure they're very happy about that.
And the answer is, of course, I didn't. I wouldn't know. I don't do sport at all.
Okay, that's fair enough. Well, let's leave that one. Okay, so you went to, you told me you went to Jeddah in 1994. So that's Saudi Arabia, I think. And what were you doing then? What was the?
That was good stylist. I was working for 2 different companies. The organisation I worked for had an office in somewhere in the Middle East, and my memory from that was the client, who was Egyptian and wanted some free software, which I wouldn't give him, and so he threatened to have the agent shot. Now, the client was Egyptian and the agent was Egyptian, and I had no idea what was going on, but I found it really, really stressful. And I refused to extend, and I came back into England and almost wrote myself off and the car. And I refused to go to anyone in the Middle East for another 20 years. Nevertheless, interesting experience.
How long were you actually there for?
Oh, about 4 months, not a lot.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can get an idea of things in 4 months, I think. You can see which way the wind's blowing for sure.
And you had to drive, and in those days, I could tell the difference between all the different kinds of Coca-Cola and Pepsi, none of which I actually drink now, but in those days, that was it in public, at least.
Okay, I see. Right. Now, you've been working for yourself for a long time. What would you say were the highlights and the not so highlights of working for yourself? I've been running my own company since 1990, so yeah, there's been a few ups and downs. So, what are your recollections?
I think the thing you learn is eventually some work will come, and that's always been the case. There's been times when there doesn't appear to be anything, and you have to really push it to find the work and the connections. It all comes from connections, and so in the fallow times, you spend time building relationships, which is what I do now as well, because I enjoy doing it.
Okay, so what have you got any more highlights or lowlights? So what are the big moments over those years where you felt that things were going great, and maybe those days when things were not quite as you would like?
I always remember the not so great ones. I remember being in Singapore, and my job there was working for a bank to review a project. And I was in Hong Kong. I got taken to Singapore. I met the boss, who then left the country within 2 hours. And I'm there with this team of Chinese managing the Indians. And my job is to review this project. And every time I find anything wrong with it, they take a lot of persuading to be told something's wrong with it, and second, they remove it from the contract. So I had 3 weeks for this, and I refused to say it was any good, and they wouldn't let me say it was terrible. So I wrote the best non-committal report I've ever written on that one, but it was just so stressful. And driving around Johannesburg was no fun either. And I remember I was working on my last full-time job. I was working for this guy called Sadi, who's from Iran or Iraq or something like that. And we were in Johannesburg, and I went with him to sell this product because his English wasn't very good. And it came with 4 weeks of free consultancy. And guess who had to go and do that? Yours truly. And so we went back again. And on the first day, in the second trip, we followed someone to the office from the hotel, about 20 minutes. And the next day we went on our own, and it took us 2 hours. And we said, we've been through all these places, Soweto and goodness and all these different places. You can't stop the car. You can't ask anybody anything. You have to keep going. And they were horrified that all these places we've been through to get to the work. So it was the travelling and where you parked the car. Those were the things that were the challenge. Because, I mean, in Italy, if you're somewhere you can't park the car, you give the car to somebody and they take it away and you come back. They also do that in South Africa, but I didn't know what the game was. And if you get it wrong, you might get shot. So it's not a risk I was prepared to take. But it was interesting.
Okay, well, I'm glad that most of us do not have such problems going to work every day. So I generally go to King's Cross when I'm working, and that involves 2 trains and a crush every morning. So that's about as dangerous as I like it myself. All right. So you've worked in 22 countries, David. So any great memories, anything unusual? I mean, you've already mentioned the work situation there in South Africa, but any other unusual situations that you found yourself in other contracts, perhaps?
I think the great skill in working in the Middle East in particular, if you're doing training courses, in theory they're 9 till about 3. In practice, no one turns up until 9:30. And my view was, if anyone turns up after that, it's tough. I'm not going to start again. But usually there's the view of the more important I am, the later I am. And then you've got all the prayer breaks and the breakfast break and the lunch break. And so there's only something like 2 hours when there's a reasonable chance that they'll all be in the room. And that's when you have to do the exercises. And they can be fun. Interestingly, also, I do a card game, which you've seen because you saw it in Ben on Medina, which involves passing cards around. And in the mixed groups, the men had to go around and switch all the cards. The women never stood up. They always sat down. They never moved. I was very pleased in Jeddah to get a group with women and men, and I got them all to change places so they're on mixed tables. And then I go to Riyadh, and there's a fence down the room, and there's men on one side and women on the other. And there were more men than women. So on this particular occasion, I thought, right, we'll use this exercise to get the men to regroup. So I got the men to stand in a line in order of how good looking they thought they were. And then we had the first 4 back in on one table and the rest. And you know what? It turned out to be exactly the same groups that we started with. I was so astonished, I couldn't think of another way to do it. Excuse me.
Okay, I worked in the West Bank in Palestine a few times at the University of Nablus, and it's exactly the same, where you have a mixed group, but all the women sit on one side of the room and all the men sit on the other. So trying to get them into pairs or into groups to work together just doesn't work, and that takes some mental shifting when you see that for the first time and you've got limited time to work with them. So it's an interesting one.
On the group photos, you get a picture of you with all the men and a picture of you with all the women. 2 separate pictures.
Yes, well, they're not allowed to talk to each other, so they prefer not to talk to each other in public. There we are. Okay, so let's move on to you've been trading for a while. So then the financial crash came in 2007, 2008. How did that affect you?
Well, fundamentally, it affected me by not having any work for 2 years and getting more and more in debt. And even then, when I finally got this contract in the Middle East for 12 months, it did nothing to relieve the debt situation apart from keep it as it was. And eventually that cost me my house and my marriage. And so I suppose it was something was inevitable going to happen anyway, but it was still not a good time. And it's only on reflection that I see afterwards how depressed I was about it. And one of the things I did in that depression, well, I got this job. I said I got this job as an analyst in the desert outside Abu Dhabi. And as an analyst, as you well know, you go and talk to people, you think about it, and then you write the report and you present it. Very simple process, except that we presented all the results in Arabic slides. They can't read. And so if any arguments went on, no idea what's going on. So returning back to the UK, I did three things. I went to lots of events because I thought I've got to learn spontaneity. That's what's the important thing, is spontaneity, which is what you don't get as an analyst. So I did three things. I went to lots of events where I presented PowerPoint on slides I'd never seen. I took singing lessons again, and I learned to sing leading a band in a bar. I used to play in a band, so it's a different category. And I hosted a radio show. Well, hosting a radio show live with guests and music is very good for spontaneity. And I've now forgotten the topic.
We were talking about the financial crisis, 2008.
Oh, yeah. So the last bit, all those three things I did in the financial crisis, because I was learning stuff without having any money to do it. And those were good things to learn. And they proved very useful ever since. Back in the Middle East, I then continued skills training insofar as I studied improvisation, and I studied and learned stand-up comedy. And that meant I learned to present with no slides. And I've learned to improvise, which I think I'm quite good at. And since then, in Spain with one of my associates, Jessica, I've learned clowning. So it takes a lot now to put me off if I'm on stage, because I've done most of these different things. And learning this has been invaluable.
Well, I agree with you. I remember when I first moved to London, I didn't know a soul, and about half a mile away was Beckenham Little Theatre, and every Monday night they held they called it theatre workshop and improv night, and I went along not to deliberately sort of learn skills or those kind of things. I just went to meet people locally because I didn't know a soul in London, and just try and make a few friends locally. But you end up on stage, you end up doing the improv, you end up doing lots of vocal development exercises, and it was just great for my confidence, that aspect, and screwing things up, getting things wrong, and everybody just laughs at you at the in the improv, and it's fantastic. And when you got to go and do that for real, stand in front of a real audience, and you make a little mistake, that used to set me back as well. But after that, 30 odd years ago, that was just like the best training course, best training event I've ever been on, because those little slips don't make any significant difference. So I don't think anybody goes around making mistakes deliberately, but if you do make a little mistake, you can forgive yourself and move on, and don't let it spoil the party.
I mean, one of the things I learned to do on the radio, by chance as this was, one of my shows, I had one guest, and he was a Spanish guitarist, and my show started at 10 in the morning, and at 10 past, I phoned him and I woke him up, and at 10:30 he comes in, and I said, well, have you got your guitar? Have you got your CD? And he said, oh, I forgot, and he walked out the building again. So at 11:15 he turns up, and we do the interview, and we do the CD, and we do the live music, and by 11 it finishes. And I learned from that I can talk total rubbish to 10,000 people for 40 minutes, totally unrehearsed. And it's not something you set yourself up for, but knowing you can do it is really interesting. You might have noticed when I was at Ben on Medina, because I couldn't get the slides to work, I improvised there. And because we were late on this, I improvised to no people whatsoever what I was doing because you weren't recording it. But it's there.
Yeah, I saw you talking to yourself. I thought you were talking to me at first, but then I thought you're probably better off talking to yourself while I try and sort the camera out. So my apologies about the camera, everybody. but there we are.
Talk amongst yourselves. There you are, Frankie Howard.
Okay. Now, moving on. You made a note in your briefing document about dogs in the Middle East. Now, what do you want to tell us about the dogs in the Middle East?
When I got another contract in Riyadh, and on that point I was separated, and I had the dogs, and I insisted on taking my dogs to the Middle East. Now, the Arabs are not well renowned for liking dogs, but I still took the 3 dogs. I mean, I had a house to myself. I wasn't sharing. And I used to take these dogs out, three dogs on leads. I used to get stopped by all these women who wanted to stroke the dogs and all the rest of it. And there was one time when this enormous big car screeched up to a halt outside in front of me, and the man got out and he said, "My wife wants to touch one of your dogs." And it took her 20 minutes to get the courage to do it. But she did. And I was very pleased with myself for that, a bit of international liaison there.
It's very generous of you to stop for 20 minutes to allow this woman to fulfill a dream, maybe.
Well, I mean, for me, it's just so interesting working with different nationalities and seeing how they all behave. And I think all those experiences means you're not scared of it. And that's what's really important. Well, thank you for inviting me. And, I can talk about myself indefinitely. You've learned that.
Okay, but we'll carry on in a moment.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.